The blood had soaked deep into the pine planks, and no matter how hard Clara Grayson scrubbed, the stain seemed determined to remain as stubborn evidence of what had transpired in her small cabin just hours before. Her hands were raw. Her dark hair had escaped its pins to hang in damp strands around her face, and tears she refused to acknowledge blurred her vision as she worked the brush back and forth in desperate, rhythmic motions. The water in her bucket had turned pink, then red, and she had emptied and refilled it 3 times already, but still the floor bore witness to the violence that had shattered her world. She did not hear the footsteps on her porch, did not register the creak of the door opening, so lost was she in the mechanical motion of trying to erase what could never truly be undone. "Madam," the voice made her jump, and she looked up with wild eyes, the scrub brush raised like a weapon. Standing in her doorway, silhouetted against the late afternoon sun of September 1882, was a cowboy she had seen around Centralia, Washington, a handful of times but never spoken to. He was tall, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of the evergreen forests that surrounded their small lumber town. His hat was in his hands, held respectfully against his chest, and concern etched lines around his mouth. "I heard something might be wrong," he said carefully, his gaze taking in the scene before him with quick intelligence. "Saw Doc Henderson riding out of town in a hurry, and Mrs. Paulson said she heard shouting from this direction earlier." Clara's mouth opened, but no words came. What could she possibly say? How could she explain the nightmare that had unfolded in this very room? The cowboy stepped inside, closing the door behind him with a gentleness that seemed at odds with his rough appearance. His boots were dusty from riding, his shirt bore the stains of honest work, and there was a revolver at his hip that he made no move toward. Instead, he crouched down beside her, his eyes searching her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Tell me what happened and I will fix it," he said, and there was such conviction in his voice that for the first time since the horror began, Clara felt something loosen in her chest. She sat back on her heels, the brush falling from her nerveless fingers. "You cannot fix this. No one can." "Try me." His name was Ethan Reeves, she learned, and he had been working at the lumber mill for the past 6 months, having come west from Missouri after his father's death left him with nothing but a horse and a desire to start fresh. He listened without interruption as Clara's story spilled out in broken fragments, her voice shaking with exhaustion and terror. Her brother had come to her cabin that morning. James Grayson had always been trouble, even as a boy back in Ohio where they had grown up, but out here in Washington territory, far from the law and civilization, his worst tendencies had flourished like weeds. He had fallen in with a gang of men who robbed stages and terrorized homesteaders, and he had shown up at Clara's door with blood already on his hands and a wild look in his eyes. "He said he needed money," Clara whispered, staring at the stained floorboards. "Said he had shot a man during a robbery gone wrong, and he needed to get out of the territory before the marshal caught up with him. I told him I did not have any money to give him, that I barely scraped by on what I made taking in sewing and laundry." Ethan's jaw tightened, but he remained silent, letting her continue. "He got angry, started tearing through my things, breaking what little I owned, and then the marshal arrived." Her voice broke. "Someone must have seen James come this way, must have told Marshal Cooper. He knocked on the door, called out James's name, and my brother panicked." The next part was the hardest to tell. James had grabbed Clara, used her as a shield when the marshal forced his way inside. There had been a scuffle, a gunshot, and then chaos. Clara had managed to wrench herself free, and in the confusion, James had fled out the back window. But Marshal Cooper lay on her floor, bleeding from a wound to his shoulder, his deputy arriving moments later to help carry him to Doc Henderson's office down the street. "The marshal will live," Clara said, her voice hollow. "Doc Henderson said the bullet went clean through, but my brother shot a lawman and everyone knows it happened in my home. They will think I was helping him. They will think I am part of his gang." "Were you?" Ethan asked, his voice neutral. Clara's head snapped up, her eyes flashing with the first real fire he had seen in them. "I have not spoken to James in 2 years, not since he stole from the family that took us in after our parents died. I wanted nothing to do with his criminal life." Ethan nodded slowly as if he had expected that answer. "Then we will make sure everyone knows the truth." "How?" Clara gestured helplessly at the bloodstain. "I cannot even get this cleaned up. Every time I look at it, I see it all happening again." Without a word, Ethan took the brush from where it had fallen and dipped it into the bucket. His movements were efficient, practiced, and Clara found herself watching in something like a daze as this stranger knelt on her floor and began to scrub away the evidence of her trauma. He worked in silence for several minutes, and she noticed that he attacked the stain from a different angle, using more force in some places and less in others, as if he understood something about bloodstains that she did not. She did not want to think about how he might have gained that knowledge. "My father was a doctor," Ethan said, as if reading her thoughts. "I helped him plenty of times clean up after surgeries and accidents. Blood is stubborn, but it can be beaten with the right technique and enough patience." "Why are you helping me?" The question burst from Clara before she could stop it. "You do not know me. You owe me nothing." Ethan paused in his scrubbing and looked up at her. In the dimming light of her cabin, his eyes seemed darker, more intense. "I know what it is like to be alone when everything falls apart. I know what it is like to be blamed for things you did not do, to have people look at you with suspicion because of the actions of your kin. My father was a good man and a fine doctor, but my uncle was a thief who ended up hanged. For years after, people looked at me sideways, wondering if I had the same bad blood in me." There was old pain in his voice, and Clara felt an unexpected kinship with this man who had appeared in her darkest hour like some kind of answer to a prayer she had not thought to make. "So you understand," she said softly. "I understand." He returned to scrubbing. "And I understand that sometimes a person needs someone to stand beside them and say that they are good, regardless of what their family has done. So that is what I am going to do for you, Miss Grayson. I am going to help you clean up this mess, and then I am going to make sure everyone in Centralia knows that you are not responsible for your brother's sins." Clara felt tears prick her eyes again, but this time they were not born entirely of despair. "I do not know how to thank you." "You do not have to thank me. Just tell me you have somewhere safe to stay tonight, because your brother is still out there, and he might come back looking for money or revenge or both." She had not thought of that, had been too consumed with the immediate horror to consider what James might do next. The realization sent a cold spike of fear through her chest. "I have nowhere. I know no one in this town well enough to impose on them, especially not now." Ethan sat back on his heels, considering. "There is a boarding house on 2nd Street, run by a woman named Mrs. Fletcher. She is tough as nails but fair. I will take you there once we finish here, and I will pay for a room until this situation is resolved." "I cannot let you do that," Clara protested. "You have already done too much." "You can and you will," Ethan said firmly. "Unless you have a better plan." She did not, and they both knew it. After a moment, Clara nodded, accepting his help because she had no other choice and because something in his steady presence made her feel safer than she had felt in months, perhaps years. They worked together as the sun set, emptying and refilling the bucket again and again, until finally the stain began to lighten. Ethan found some lye soap under her wash basin and used it to break down the last stubborn traces of blood. And by the time full darkness had fallen and Clara had lit her lamps, the floor was not perfect, but it was clean enough that she could bear to look at it without her stomach turning. Ethan helped her pack a small bag with essentials, and then they walked through the quiet streets of Centralia to Mrs. Fletcher's boarding house. The older woman answered the door with a suspicious frown, but Ethan spoke to her in low, earnest tones, and whatever he said convinced her to give Clara a small room on the second floor with a view of the street. "You stay as long as you need, dear Mrs. Fletcher said, her manner warming considerably once Ethan had finished his explanation. "And do not worry about payment. Mr. Reeves here has taken care of everything." Clara wanted to protest again, but exhaustion was crashing over her in waves, and she could barely keep her eyes open. Ethan seemed to notice because he touched her elbow gently and steered her toward the stairs. "Get some rest," he said. "I will come by in the morning and we will go talk to Marshal Cooper together, make sure he understands exactly what happened. What if he does not believe me?" Clara asked, her voice small. "He will believe you," Ethan said with such confidence that she almost believed him, "and I will make sure of it." He left her at the door to her room, and Clara went inside to find a space that was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window that she immediately locked. She lay down fully clothed on top of the blankets, certain that sleep would elude her, but her body had other ideas. She dropped into unconsciousness like a stone into deep water and did not wake until sunlight streamed through the window the next morning. True to his word, Ethan was waiting for her in the boarding house parlor when she came downstairs. He had cleaned himself up, changed his shirt and shaved, and Clara was struck by how handsome he was when he was not covered in trail dust and her brother's crimes. He offered her his arm, and together they walked to Doc Henderson's office, where Marshal Cooper was recovering. The marshal was a man in his 50s with steel gray hair and eyes that had seen too much violence in his years of keeping the peace. He was propped up in bed, his shoulder heavily bandaged, but his gaze was sharp and assessing when Clara and Ethan entered the room. "Miss Grayson," he said, his voice rough with pain, "I am glad you are well. I wanted to send word last night, but Doc here insisted I rest." "Marshal, I am so sorry," Clara began, but he held up his good hand to stop her. "You have nothing to apologize for. I know James Grayson is your brother, but I also know you are not cut from the same cloth. I have been watching you since you came to Centralia last spring, and I have seen nothing but an honest woman trying to make an honest living. What happened yesterday was not your fault." The relief that flooded through Clara was so intense it made her knees weak. Ethan's hand at her elbow steadied her. "But your brother is still out there," Marshal Cooper continued, his expression hardening. "And he is more dangerous now than ever, because shooting a lawman puts a noose around his neck. Men like that, backed into a corner, they do desperate things. I have sent word to the territorial marshal in Olympia, and we will have more men out looking for him soon, but until he is caught, I want you to be careful, Miss Grayson." "I will make sure she is safe," Ethan said, speaking for the first time. The marshal's eyes shifted to him, and something passed between the two men, some silent understanding that Clara could not quite read. "See that you do, Reeves," Marshal Cooper said. "And Miss Grayson, if your brother tries to contact you, you come straight to me or to my deputy. Do not try to handle him on your own." Clara promised she would, and then she and Ethan took their leave. Once they were back outside in the cool autumn morning, Clara turned to Ethan with questions spilling from her lips. "How did you know the marshal would believe me? And why did he look at you like he knows you?" Ethan had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable. "The marshal and I have an understanding. When I first came to Centralia, there were some men from Missouri who followed me, thinking I might know where my father had hidden some money. There was no hidden money, of course, but they did not believe me. Things got ugly and the marshal stepped in, helped me run them off. I have been helping him out here and there ever since, keeping an ear to the ground for trouble, letting him know when I hear things at the mill or in the saloons. You are an informant, Clara said, understanding dawning. I prefer to think of it as being a concerned citizen, Ethan replied with a slight smile. But yes, I suppose that is the word for it. The point is, Marshal Cooper trusts my judgment, and when I told him last night that you were innocent, he believed me. You went to see him last night, after you left me at the boarding house. I wanted to make sure he understood the situation before rumors started spreading. Centralia is a small town and people talk. Clara stopped walking and turned to face him fully. Why are you doing all of this for me, Ethan? And please, do not just say it is because you understand what I am going through. There is more to it than that. Ethan was quiet for a long moment, his gaze holding hers. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and honest. I saw you once, about 2 months ago, at the general store. You were buying thread and the shopkeeper tried to shortchange you. You called him on it, polite but firm, and he got embarrassed and tried to make it seem like you were the one who could not count. But you stood your ground, and eventually he had to admit his mistake. I was impressed by that, by the fact that you did not back down even when he tried to make you feel small. Clara remembered that day, remembered the flush of anger and humiliation she had felt when Mr. Peterson tried to cheat her out of her hard-earned coins. After that, I found myself noticing you around town, Ethan continued. The way you always had a kind word for Mrs. Chen at the laundry, even though most folks look down on her because she is from China. The way you helped old Mr. Tucker carry his groceries home, even though he is ornery as a badger, and never thanks anyone for anything. You are a good person, Clara Grayson, and when I saw you yesterday scrubbing blood from your floor with that look of desperation on your face, I knew I could not just walk away. Something warm unfurled in Clara's chest, something that felt dangerously like hope. You have been watching me. Not in a strange way, Ethan said quickly, a hint of color rising in his cheeks. Just noticing. Admiring from a distance. I'm not good with words and I did not know how to approach you, so I just kept putting it off. And then yesterday happened, and I figured maybe fate was telling me to stop being a coward. Clara found herself smiling despite everything, the first real smile since her brother had darkened her doorstep. I do not think you are a coward. I think you are possibly the bravest man I have ever met. The look Ethan gave her was so full of warmth and something deeper, something that made her heart beat faster, that Clara had to look away before she did something foolish like throw her arms around him in the middle of the street. They walked back to the boarding house in comfortable silence, and Ethan left her there with a promise to return later. Clara spent the morning helping Mrs. Fletcher with laundry, needing something to occupy her hands and mind, and the older woman was grateful for the assistance. Over lunch, Mrs. Fletcher told Clara stories about Centralia's founding, about the hard winter of 1875 when they nearly lost the town to snow and starvation, about the summer of 1878 when a fire swept through and destroyed half the buildings on Main Street. We are a resilient people here, Mrs. Fletcher said, pouring them both coffee. We look after our own and we do not judge a person by their kin. Your brother's sins are his own, Miss Grayson, and nobody in this town will hold them against you. Clara wanted to believe that, but she knew small towns and the way gossip could spread like wildfire. Still, she thanked Mrs. Fletcher for her kindness and went back to her room to work on some mending she had brought from her cabin. Ethan returned late in the afternoon, bringing news. There has been a sighting of your brother about 20 miles south of here, near the Chehalis River. Marshal Cooper's deputy and a few men from town have gone to investigate. They think James might be trying to get to Portland, maybe catch a ship out of the territory from there. I hope they catch him, Clara said, and she meant it. She loved her brother in the complicated way one loved family, but she also knew he had made his choices, and now he had to face the consequences. There is something else, Ethan said, his expression troubled. I heard talk at the mill today. Most of it was sympathetic to you, but there were a few men who were saying things, suggesting that maybe you were involved, that maybe you helped your brother escape. Clara's stomach sank. Who? Walt Morrison and his crew. They are troublemakers anyway, always looking for someone to blame for their own failures, but their talk could turn others against you if it is not countered. What do I do? Clara asked, feeling helpless. You keep your head high and you do not give them the satisfaction of seeing you scared, Ethan said firmly. And you let me handle Walt Morrison. I do not want you fighting my battles for me, Clara protested. It is not fighting. It is just setting the record straight. Trust me, Clara, please. The use of her first name, spoken with such earnest concern, made Clara's resistance crumble. She nodded, and Ethan gave her a smile that lit up his whole face. Over the next few days, Clara slowly began to feel less like a pariah and more like a valued member of the community. Ethan seemed to be everywhere, subtly steering conversations, making sure people knew the truth of what had happened, and standing by Clara's side whenever she ventured out of the boarding house. Mrs. Chen stopped her on the street to express sympathy, and to offer Clara extra work at the laundry if she needed it. Mr. Tucker, the ornery old man she had helped, came by the boarding house with a basket of apples from his tree and a gruff assurance that anyone who thought poorly of her could answer to him. And then there was Ethan, steady and constant, always there when she needed him but never pushing for more than she was ready to give. They fell into an easy rhythm, taking walks together in the evening after he finished at the mill, sharing meals at the boarding house, talking about their lives and dreams and fears. Clara learned that Ethan wanted to own his own ranch someday, wanted to raise horses and maybe cattle, wanted to build something lasting. She told him about her childhood in Ohio, about the parents she had lost to cholera when she was 12, about the years she and James had spent being passed between relatives who saw them as burdens rather than blessings. That is why I came west, Clara confessed one evening as they sat on the porch of the boarding house, watching the sun set behind the mountains. I wanted to be somewhere that I was not just the orphan girl, the one people pitied or resented. I wanted to make my own way, prove that I could be someone on my own terms. You have done that, Ethan said quietly. You are one of the most capable, independent women I have ever met. I did not feel very capable or independent when you found me scrubbing my floor, Clara admitted. Strength is not about never needing help, Ethan said. It is about having the courage to accept help when it is offered. You did that, Clara. You let me in when it would have been easier to push me away. Clara turned to look at him, at the earnest expression on his face and the way the fading light caught in his dark hair. I am glad I let you in, she said softly. I do not know what I would have done without you these past days. You would have found a way, Ethan said. But I am glad you did not have to do it alone. They sat in comfortable silence, and Clara felt something shift between them, some invisible line being crossed. When Ethan reached over and took her hand, she did not pull away. Instead, she laced her fingers through his and held on tight. A week after the incident at Clara's cabin, word came that James Grayson had been caught trying to board a ship in Portland. He had put up a fight, and in the chaos, he had been shot by a territorial marshal. The wound was not fatal, but it ensured that James would live to stand trial for his crimes. Marshal Cooper, now mostly recovered from his own wound, came to the boarding house to tell Clara the news in person. She received it with mixed emotions, relieved that her brother was no longer a threat, but saddened by the waste of a life that could have been so much more. "He will hang," Marshal Cooper said bluntly. "I am sorry, Miss Grayson, but there is no way around it. He shot a lawman, and the territorial judge does not look kindly on that." "I understand," Clara said, her voice steady even though her heart ached. "I do not condone what James did, Marshal. I hope you know that." "I do know that," the Marshal assured her. "And I want you to know that as far as I am concerned, this matter is closed where you are concerned. You are free to go back to your life, Miss Grayson, with no shadow hanging over you." After the Marshal left, Clara sat in her room and cried, not for the brother James had become, but for the brother he might have been if circumstances had been different. Ethan found her there an hour later, her eyes red and swollen, and he simply held her while she grieved. "I know he was a criminal," Clara said against Ethan's shoulder. "I know he made terrible choices. But he was still my brother, the boy who used to catch fireflies with me on summer nights and who taught me how to skip stones across the creek. And now he is going to die, and I cannot help but feel like I should have done something, anything, to stop him from going down this path." "You could not have stopped him," Ethan said gently, stroking her hair. "People make their own choices, Clara. You are not responsible for his decisions." "I know that in my head," Clara whispered, "but my heart still hurts." "Then let it hurt," Ethan said. "Grief is not something you have to push away or apologize for. Feel it, and when you are ready, let it go." They stayed like that for a long time, and Clara marveled at how safe she felt in Ethan's arms, how right it seemed to be there. When she finally pulled back, wiping her eyes, she found him looking at her with such tenderness that it made her breath catch. "I love you," Ethan said, the words simple and honest. "I know this is probably not the right time to tell you that, and I know we have only known each other for a couple of weeks, but I cannot keep it inside anymore. I love you, Clara Grayson, and I want to be with you if you will have me." Clara's heart felt like it might burst from her chest. "I love you too," she said, the words feeling like both a relief and a revelation. "I think I started falling in love with you the moment you knelt down beside me on that blood-stained floor and told me you would fix it. You did not run from my mess. You walked right into it and helped me clean it up, and that is the most romantic thing anyone has ever done for me." Ethan laughed, a sound of pure joy, and then he was kissing her, his lips warm and soft against hers. Clara kissed him back with all the emotion she had been holding inside, all the fear and hope and love tangled together into something beautiful and new. When they finally broke apart, both of them breathless, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. "I know it is fast, but I also know what I want, and I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Marry me, Clara, and let me prove to you every single day that you made the right choice." "Yes," Clara said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, Ethan Reeves, I will marry you." They were wed a month later in a simple ceremony at the small church in Centralia. Mrs. Fletcher cried happy tears and insisted on making the wedding cake herself. Mrs. Chen gave Clara a beautiful silk scarf that had belonged to her mother. Mr. Tucker showed up in a suit that smelled strongly of mothballs and actually smiled. Marshal Cooper attended, his arm still in a sling but his spirits high, and he gave them his blessing along with a warning to Ethan that he had better treat Clara right or answer to the law. Ethan had found them a small house on the edge of town. Nothing fancy but sturdy and well built, with a good piece of land that he planned to use to start his horse ranch. Clara moved out of the boarding house and into her new home, and for the first time in years, she felt like she truly belonged somewhere. The first night in their house, Ethan carried her over the threshold despite her laughing protests, and they celebrated their marriage with a joy that felt almost too big to contain. Later, lying in bed with Ethan's arms around her, Clara thought about how strange life was, how a single moment of horror had somehow led to the greatest happiness she had ever known. "What are you thinking about?" Ethan asked, his voice drowsy. "About blood on floorboards," Clara said honestly. "About how the worst day of my life led to the best thing that ever happened to me." Ethan tightened his arms around her. "I am glad I walked through that door," he said. "I am glad I got to be the one to help you to love you." "I am glad too," Clara whispered. "I am so glad." The months that followed were some of the happiest of Clara's life. Ethan worked hard to get his horse ranch started, and Clara took on more sewing work, building a reputation as the best seamstress in Centralia. They saved every penny they could, planning for a future that seemed bright and full of promise. In December, Clara received word that James had been tried, convicted, and hanged for his crimes. She mourned quietly, Ethan by her side, and then she let her brother go, forgiving him for the pain he had caused and choosing to remember the good parts of their childhood instead of the dark path he had taken. Spring came, and with it, Clara discovered she was pregnant. Ethan was overjoyed, building a cradle with his own hands and fussing over Clara like she was made of glass. She endured his concern with patient amusement, continuing her work until her belly grew too large to lean over the sewing machine comfortably. Their son was born on a warm day in August 1883, arriving with a lusty cry that announced his presence to the world. They named him Samuel, after Ethan's father, and Clara thought she had never seen anything more beautiful than her husband holding their tiny son with such wonder and love in his eyes. "Thank you," Ethan said, looking up at Clara with tears streaming down his face. "Thank you for this gift, for our family, for everything. Thank you for walking through my door that day," Clara replied, her own eyes wet. "Thank you for not running away from the blood and the mess. Thank you for loving me." "Always," Ethan promised. "I will always love you, Clara. You and Samuel, and whatever other children we might have. This is my family, and I will spend every day of my life making sure you know how much you mean to me." Life settled into a rhythm that was busy but fulfilling. Samuel grew from a tiny infant into a chubby, happy baby who laughed easily and adored his father. The horse ranch prospered as Ethan's reputation for training quality animals spread throughout the territory. Clara's sewing business continued to thrive, and she took on a young woman named Marie as an apprentice, teaching her the trade and enjoying the company. 2 years after Samuel was born, Clara had another child, a daughter they named Rose, who had her mother's dark hair and her father's green eyes. Samuel was fascinated by his baby sister, always wanting to help care for her, and Ethan joked that they would have to start building a bigger house if they kept expanding their family. "I would not mind," Clara said, cuddling Rose while Samuel played at her feet. "I always wanted a big family, lots of love and laughter filling the house." "Then that is what we will have," Ethan said, leaning down to kiss her. "Whatever makes you happy, Clara, that is all I have ever wanted." The years passed in a blur of joy and hard work and love. Samuel grew into a bright, energetic boy who loved the horses as much as his father did. Rose proved to be a sweet-natured child with a talent for singing that filled their home with music. Clara and Ethan added another son, James Ethan, named after the brother Clara had lost, and a way of honoring the complicated past that had brought them together. Little James was as rambunctious as his older brother was serious, and the two boys kept their parents constantly on their toes. By 1890, the Reeves Ranch had become one of the most successful in the region. Ethan employed several men to help with the work, and Clara's sewing business had expanded to include 3 apprentices. They had built the bigger house they joked about, a beautiful 2-story structure with enough room for their growing family and the life they had created together. One evening, as they sat on their porch watching Samuel teach Rose how to braid a rope while young James toddled around the yard chasing butterflies, Clara leaned her head on Ethan's shoulder and felt a contentment so deep it was almost overwhelming. "You ever think about that day?" she asked quietly. "The day you found me scrubbing blood from my floor?" "Sometimes," Ethan admitted. "I think about how scared you looked, how broken, and how I almost did not go in. I almost convinced myself it was not my business, that I should just keep walking." "What made you change your mind?" "I do not know," Ethan said thoughtfully. "Instinct maybe, or fate. Or maybe I just recognized something in you, some quality that called to me. Whatever it was, I am grateful for it every single day." "Me too," Clara said softly. "I was so lost that day, so certain that my life was over, that I would never be anything more than the sister of a criminal. And then you walked in and told me you would fix it, and somehow you did. You fixed everything, Ethan." "We fixed it together," Ethan corrected gently. "You are the strongest person I know, Clara. You did not need me to save you. You just needed someone to stand beside you while you saved yourself." Clara turned to look at her husband, at the lines that time and hard work had added to his face, at the gray starting to show in his dark hair, at the eyes that still looked at her with the same love and wonder they had held on their wedding day. "I love you," she said, as she had said countless times over the years, but it never felt like enough, never fully captured the depth of what she felt. "I love you too," Ethan said, pulling her close. "Today, tomorrow, and all the days after that. You are my heart, Clara Reeves, and I am the luckiest man alive." They sat together as the sun set, their children playing in the yard, their home solid behind them, and Clara thought about the twisting path that had led her to this moment. The blood on her floorboards was long gone, scrubbed away by determined hands and honest effort, but the memory of it remained as a reminder of how far she had come, of how much she had overcome. She thought about her brother James, about the choices that had destroyed him, and she sent a silent prayer into the gathering dusk that he had found some peace wherever his soul had ended up. She forgave him, truly and completely, for the fear and pain he had caused, because holding on to anger would only poison the beautiful life she had built. Most of all, she thought about Ethan, about the cowboy who had appeared in her darkest moment and offered her hope when she had none. He had promised to fix it, and he had, not through grand gestures or heroic acts, but through simple, steady presence and unconditional love. He had shown her that she was worthy of happiness, that her past did not define her future, that love could bloom even in the midst of blood and sorrow. Samuel called out something that made Rose laugh, and James toddled over to his parents with a butterfly clutched carefully in his chubby fist. Ethan lifted the boy into his lap, and Clara watched as her husband patiently explained that they needed to let the butterfly go so it could fly free. James opened his hand, and they all watched as the butterfly spread its wings and soared into the evening sky. "Free," James said, clapping his hands together with delight. "Free," Clara echoed, thinking of all the ways that word applied to her life now. She was free from fear, free from the weight of her brother's crimes, free to love and be loved in return. She was free to build the life she wanted, to raise her children in joy and security, to grow old beside the man who had saved her not by solving her problems, but by believing she had the strength to solve them herself. The stars began to appear overhead, bright pinpoints of light in the darkening sky, and Clara held her family close, breathing in the scent of pine and horses and home. The blood on her floorboards was gone, washed away by time and effort and love, and in its place was this, a life rich with meaning and connection and endless possibility. Ethan caught her eye and smiled, that same smile that had warmed her heart from the very beginning, and Clara smiled back, her soul at peace. Whatever trials the future might bring, whatever sorrows or joys lay ahead, she knew they would face them together, side by side, just as they had faced that first terrible day when a cowboy had walked through her door and promised to fix what was broken. He had kept his promise, and in doing so, he had given her everything she had ever dreamed of and more than she had dared to hope for. This was her life now, full and complete and beautiful, built on a foundation of blood transformed into love, of despair transmuted into joy, of a single moment of kindness that had changed everything. Clara looked at her family, her husband, her children, her home, and she knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be, living exactly the life she was meant to live, loved exactly as she was meant to be loved. And it was more than enough. It was everything.